Quarantine in Australia. The border control of Australia is governed by the AQIS at airports and cargo docks to ensure that things that enter Australia are disease-free. They also ensure that no foreign species are introduced that could devastate the Australian fauna and flora. The role of quarantine in Australia is to prevent the entry or spread of animal, plant or human diseases and pests. It is an isolated country because it is an island, so the only means of really entering the country is by cargo docks or airports. These days, Australia has a lot of transportation going in and out of the country due to its large tourism, trade and business industries. Australia has a wide variety of flora and fauna that could be damaged by disease or pests from outside of the country. This is a consistent threat in Australia. Not only could it affect the animals and plants in Australia, but it could also affect the people by means of health, jobs and the Australian economy. Human quarantine is basically making sure people travelling into the countries are not affected with any diseases. To ensure that humans don't bring diseases into Australia, the AQIS have set precautions to minimise the probability that a disease will enter. Procedures for ensuring diseases or pathogens don't enter into Australia is by reporting passengers that have signs of any diseases, disinfecting all planes in between flights. The quarantine of animals is controlled by pets needing to spend time in quarantine. The prohibited list and checking for furs or non-food products. Plant quarantine involves the examination and prohibition of plants and plant products brought into Australia. It is very hard to get plants or plant products into Australia because of the prohibited list. This list is created from examination of plants by the AQIS. The prohibited list for plants includes seeds, fruits, vegetables, bulbs and woods. The prohibited list for animals include uncanned meats and dairy products. Australia has a wide, diverse and fragile range of flora and fauna to protect. If this is not protected, it could devastate Australia's plants and animals, thus affecting the tourism industry. This has always been a problem in Australia. Bovine spongiform encephalopathy, otherwise known as mad cow disease, is a fatal neurodegenerative disease in cows and cattle that causes the brain and spinal cord of the cattle to a spongy degeneration. This disease affects all cattle and it has an incubation period of about 30 months to 8 years. This disease affected the United Kingdom with devastating results. With about 180,000 cattle have been affected and more than 4.4 million cattle were slaughtered during the eradication period. This disease has a human version called Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, or CJD. This disease was vectored through the consumption of infected meat and by October 2009 had taken 166 lives in the UK and 44 elsewhere. What would happen if this disease were to arise in Australia? This is Farmer Sam. He owns a cattle farm in Orange. 3 years ago he changed the feed that he usually uses to an English brand imported from England. He has noticed that a few of his cattle haven't been acting like cattle lately. Now Farmer Sam has two options to make. One, he ignores the signs and carries on selling his beef at Hodges' local butchery. Or two, he can report the cattle to the Australian DAFF and go under inspection. Sam gets information that the cattle are positive for mad cow disease and is ordered to kill his whole herd of cattle. Option 1. He notices nothing has affected the people consuming his beef and assumes everything is fine. But 2.5 years later, one of the Orange's locals dies of CJD. Farmer Sam is charged with selling infected produce, and Australia's 32 billion agricultural export industry is shut down because other countries don't want the risk of bringing mad cow disease into their country, leaving one unhappy farmer, many mourning for lost relatives, and one poorer Australia. Option 2. Farmer Sam slaughters his cattle for the greater good of Australia, and Australia endorses him for his help in the eradication of mad cow disease in Australia. He finds that the disease arose from the feed that he uses, leaving a happy Farmer Sam and a happy Australia. This is a small example of what could happen if mad cow disease enters Australia. If it was on a larger scale, the results of the disease would be much more devastating and could affect many lives. Filogaria is a pest that affects grapevine plants worldwide. They're related to aphids and are sap-sucking pests that feed on the leaves and roots of grapevine plants. They are like pale yellow dots on leaves. Once a crop is attacked by Filogaria, the crop is pretty much destroyed because there is no way of removing the pest without damaging the crop. Over time, the plant will die because of the secondary fungal infections, gradually cutting the flow of the nutrients and water to the vine. This pest is already in Australia but is being controlled by zoning the affected areas and trying to stop the spread of the pest by marking areas from the low risk to affected area and observing the movement of the pest. It is also controlled by quarantine across the regions of Australia.
Well done.